It was another day on the Sea of Thieves, and Captain Fireheart was just heading out on another voyage. Her crew members were out doing other things, which meant that Fireheart was traveling solo, but she didn't mind. It was surprisingly quiet on the seas, which gave the captain a bit of relief. Whenever the seas were quiet, it meant no rival ships were nearby. Captain Fireheart was just about to depart when she saw a flashing red tornado appearing in the sky from a nearby island. It meant only one thing: a skeleton lord was approaching. Fireheart knew that whoever the lord was, it had to be taken down, no matter the costs. So she quickly jumped aboard her ship, the Alpha's Flame, lowered the sails, raised the anchor, and she was soon on her way. Captain Fireheart knew that the skeleton lords were powerful beings, and having to take down one solo was a risky thing to do, which made the captain a little nervous, thinking about the possible things that could go wrong. But she quickly shook off the nervousness after remembering one thing. This is not the first time she battled against a skeleton lord and won. One thing is for sure, if she can pull this off, the reward she'll receive will be worth a ton of gold. The island that was called Cannon Cove was the location where the red tornado was, and by the time Fireheart reached the beach, she saw it. The skeleton lord that was known as Warden Chi. No turning back now. Fireheart equipped her cutlass and Eye of Reach, parked her ship by the beach, and started heading towards the skeleton lord. The battle was already beginning as the big skeleton started throwing small but powerful balls of fire at her. Luckily, she managed to dodge them. But the one thing she feared the most at the moment, when the ground began to shake, and then out of nowhere, meteors started falling from the sky, and geysers started erupting from everything. And the worst thing is that her ship was very close to the meteor shower. Fireheart knew that she had to lure the skeleton lord away from her ship, and she also had to keep running until the meteor shower and geyser field stopped. Eventually, they did.
There's nowhere to run,
the warden said.
Oh, I don't plan on running,
Fireheart replied. She wasn't scared of this flaming skeleton monster. If she faced off against skeleton lords like this one, she knew she could defeat it. The battle was fierce, furious, and fiery. Fireheart was giving it all she's got. The skeleton lord kept on summoning smaller skeletons to try to take out the captain and unleashing more meteor showers and geyser fields. But luckily the two were far enough away from Fireheart's ship. Captain Fireheart was starting to get exhausted from all of the jumping and running around, but she couldn't give up. Not now. With every slash of her cutlass and every bullet from her Eye of Reach, she dealt more damage to the big skeleton. Until finally...
I can't do this! Not like this! No!
And just like that, it was over. The skeleton lord was defeated. Then suddenly, more geysers came, but this time chests filled with loot appeared. Captain Fireheart let out a roar of victory, knowing that she had won. As mentioned, this wasn't the first Fireheart took down a skeleton lord, nor the second either. But today, this was indeed the third. While she was bringing the loot she received back to her ship, another ship came into view, thinking that whoever was on that approaching ship would try to sink her ship. Fireheart quickly put down the chest she was carrying and hurried over to her ship, hoping to confront whoever was on the other ship. When she got onto her ship, she saw two pirates. One was at the cannons, maybe to strike at the Alpha's flame at any moment. Confronting other pirates was difficult, sometimes on the Sea of Thieves, but Fireheart knew she had to try.
Now listen, I don't want any trouble.
She said to the two pirates.
Don't worry, we're just here to take down the Skeleton Lord.
Fireheart was surprised. These pirates weren't here to cause trouble at all. They were just here to get some loot from taking down the Skeleton Lord that she took down already. She kinda felt bad for them.
Sorry, I already took down the Skeleton Lord. You just missed it.
She said, and she explained to the pirates that she managed to take down the Skeleton Lord solo. The two pirates were disappointed that they weren't able to take it down, but were also quite impressed that Fireheart took it down solo.
Well, do you want to share the loot?
Fireheart asked. Even though it was a generous offer, the two pirates declined Fireheart's offer, for the win was hers, and it wouldn't feel right taking the loot she won. Soon, Fireheart got all of the loot onto her ship. The two pirates did take one thing, however, which was known as the Chest of Rage. Fireheart was okay with letting them take it, as she lowered the sails, raised the anchor, and got the ship turned around towards the nearest outpost. She also waved goodbye to the two pirates and wished them good luck on their next voyage. The new Golden Sands outpost was the closest place to sell the loot that Fireheart received. Once she was finished, she got her hands on a total of over 35,000 gold. Needless to say, Captain Fireheart was pretty proud of herself, wondering what tomorrow will bring. Another day on the Sea of Thieves was upon Captain Fireheart and her crew, and for this adventure, she and one of her crew members known as Indigo Seawater were on their way to a dangerous fortress called the Trader's Fate Fortress. But this time, the two pirates were driving Indigo's ship called the Aquatic Star. They were also flying a flag representing an emissary alliance to the Order of Souls. Fireheart learned from her days of being captain that if you raise an emissary flag, they'll be able to get much more gold if they sell specific items to that faction they were representing. But they had to be careful with any other ships that might want to cause trouble. The fortress was infested with evil ghost pirates called Phantoms who would protect it at all costs. However, Captain Fireheart knew that this would be an easy voyage, because while her crew members were busy with other things, she took on a few fortresses on her own, so she knew exactly what to do. As for Indigo, he only accompanied Fireheart in handling a fortress once, but after learning from Fireheart on his first fortress battle, he also knew what to do. They were only about a mile from the fortress when they heard bells chiming and the cannons suddenly started firing. Fireheart did her best to avoid the cannons, but the ship came in a bit too fast when they dropped the anchor and ended up crashing into some of the rocks, and took a bit of damage. But luckily, Indigo managed to repair the holes in the ship and kept it from sinking. Luckily, the ship was now out of reach from the cannons. They both climbed the ladder, and they were soon inside the fortress. The evil ghost pirates came in from all sides. Phantoms of the fortress, Captain Fireheart and Indigo Seawater battled through each one of the phantoms, taking them all out, one by one. Eventually, the ghost captain arrived, and with one last slice of her cutlass, Fireheart delivered the final blow. The phantom captain dropped a special key, the one
to open the treasury room that was filled with loot. As Fireheart grabbed the loot, Indigo quickly went outside to bring the ship over so they could swiftly bring the goods back to the ship. And for the two pirates, having the loot brought to their ship was a very satisfying feeling. While Indigo was bringing the loot back to the ship, Fireheart decided to explore the fortress for any more hidden goodies. Eventually, she found another key for a smaller room at the top of the fortress that held some more treasure. By the time all of the treasure was on the ship, Fireheart and Indigo knew they had to get to the nearest outpost to sell their loot quickly. They didn't have anyone else trying to steal their loot, so they raised the anchor, got the ship turned around, and they were soon on their way. They eventually got a chance to sell their loot at Galleon's Cave outpost and ended up with over 27,000 gold. While Fireheart and Indigo were resting on their ship for a few minutes before setting off on another voyage, Fireheart saw a red glowing skull cloud up in the sky, and she knew it meant one thing: another skeleton lord was approaching. And after some talking with Indigo, they both agreed to head out and take down the Skeleton Lord. The Skeleton Lord was on a small island called Sharkfin Camp, and the cannons were already firing at their ship by the time they arrived. Skeletons were everywhere, almost taking out the two pirates many times. Some of those skeletons were even carrying barrels filled with gunpowder, which would explode at a single bullet shot. Luckily, Fireheart and Indigo were able to use the gunpowder barrels to their advantage in taking out multiple skeletons at once, until eventually the Skeleton Lord finally emerged from the shadows, and to Fireheart's surprise, it was Warden Shi, the one Skeleton Lord that she took down days ago, and now was back from revenge. But luckily, Fireheart knew how to take down the skeleton, and the last time she took it down. As for Indigo, it was his first time taking down one of these. But all of a sudden, Fireheart saw an upcoming ship arriving on the island to try and steal the loot from the two pirates. But thankfully, Fireheart was able to get a few hits on the enemy ship, enough for it to head out with the pirates having their tails between their legs. After a few more minutes of battling later, the Skeleton Lord finally went down, dropping the key to the treasure vault, and with all of the loot inside the vault were two special chests called the Chest of Fortune and the Chest of Legends. While Indigo brought the loot outside, Fireheart went back to the ship to get ready to grab the loot onto the ship. But they had to be quick because a storm was brewing at the fortress, and they both had the fear that the enemy ship might return to steal their loot. So they had to get all of the treasure onto their ship and book it out of there as soon as possible.
Besides, we need someone to check.
And I got struck by lightning again. Damn it.
Oh boy.
Ah! Sorry. Oh!
Oh!
Not again.
It struck both of us! That's a Looney Tunes cartoon right there.
Not again.
Are you okay?
I don't think so, because I got struck 3 times now.
By the time they got all of the loot back to the ship, the rain stopped, and they got the ship turned around and were able to get to another outpost known as Daggertooth Outpost. Captain Fireheart and Indigo Seawater were proud of themselves, since their gold amount not only doubled, but perhaps quadrupled how much they received with over 140,000 gold. The two pirates were indeed satisfied with their journey on that day, and they wondered what their next voyage would bring. It was once again another solo voyage for Captain Fireheart, but this time she was driving another ship that she purchased, a small sloop called the Omega Voyager. And on this adventure, her crew members were off doing other things, but she wasn't alone because she had her trusty pet fox named Shadow with her. It was surprisingly another quiet day on the seas, which Fireheart always approved of, but she was having trouble deciding on what to do. Maybe a treasure hunt? Another fortress raid? As Captain Fireheart was just sailing past a small island called Barnacle Cay, Still thinking about what to do, she can see a small light beacon from a few miles away. This was another thing that Fireheart learned from her time. It possibly meant that a shipwreck and its treasure were nearby. Fireheart decided that that's what she was going to do. She started on her way toward the beacon in the sky. It took some time, but Fireheart eventually arrived at the source of the light beacon. A shipwreck with loot that was ripe for the picking. Captain Fireheart made her way through the shipwreck and found a couple of goodies, such as a sapphire mermaid gem, a couple of crates, and a special weapon called the Trident of Dark Tides. However, there was one special treasure that Fireheart found to be very valuable. She had a bit of trouble getting to it, but eventually she was able to grab it off the ship. It was called a Reaper's Bounty. Once Captain Fireheart got the Reaper chest onto her ship, she knew there was only one place to sell it. An island in the middle of the Sea of Thieves called the Reaper's Hideout. However, Fireheart heard many stories of other pirates who would go at each other's throats to get their hands on a Reaper's bounty chest. And that was the last thing she wanted. After some sailing and cautiously keeping a lookout for any enemy ships, Fireheart had finally made it to the Reaper's Hideout. She quickly jumped off her ship with the Reaper chest and went inside the hut, where the Servant of Flame was waiting. The reward that Fireheart received was a good one, for only one chest, and it was a total of exactly 10,000 gold. As she left the Reaper's hideout, she started to head to the nearest outpost. Fireheart couldn't help thinking that there might be another adventure that would soon be on the horizon. As Captain Fireheart was about a mile away from the Reaper's hideout after selling the Reaper's bounty chest, she thought of something. Another item that she found at that shipwreck she explored earlier. It was a message in a bottle, and inside that bottle was a small note that said,
The breath of the sea calls from beneath the waves. Seek it at the treasury of the lost ancients.
After reading the note, Fireheart felt a smile spread across her face. She knew exactly what the note meant. It meant that there was a special kind of rare treasure that was hidden deep, deep underwater in an ancient temple. The quest was known to be a challenge, but knowing her own time sailing the Sea of Thieves, taking down a treasury temple will be a breeze for Captain Fireheart. On the Sea of Thieves, there are two kinds of treasure temples, shrines and the treasuries. Shrines were more focused on solving puzzles in order to get the treasure, whereas treasuries were way different because pirates would have to defeat waves of enemies that were guarding the treasure. Captain Fireheart quickly went down to the temple to find where the temple was, and, surprisingly, the treasury of the Lost Ancients wasn't that far for her to travel. All she had to do was head west. A little while later, Fireheart made it to the underwater temple. The bright blue and purple lights always meant that either the treasury temple or shrine was right below the waves. Shadow, Fireheart's pet fox, wasn't allowed to join her on this quest because she didn't want to risk him getting hurt.
Stay here and watch the ship for me. Okay, Shadow?
Fireheart said as she got herself to dive down into the depths of the ocean towards the temple. With a mighty leap, Captain Fireheart jumped into the sea and began swimming down below the waves and toward the treasury of the Lost Ancients. The temple was overgrown with coral and sunken shipwrecks. Fireheart knew that she had to get inside the temple quickly because the inside of the temple had an air pocket for her. She opened the door and swam through it, and she was now inside the temple. She then saw a couple of trident weapons that were powerful enough to take down the strongest enemies from the Sea of Thieves. Fireheart grabbed one of the tridents as she walked inside the treasury, when suddenly a loud horn sounded. The first wave of enemies was approaching. Each wave of enemies proved to be a challenge, but nothing that Captain Fireheart couldn't handle. The treasury even filled up with water, with sirens attempting to take down the captain. Fireheart was able to take them down, but she also considered the sirens a bit of a nuisance.
Don't you just hate it when those sirens won't shut up?
She thought to herself. Eventually, Fireheart managed to take down the final enemies from the treasury. The big doors that held the treasure opened, and Fireheart saw all of the treasure that was inside. Quite a number of chests, including a special one called the Chest of Ancient Tributes. But what she saw was something rare that only appears in the shrines and treasuries, temples of the Sea of Thieves, a potion called the Emerald Breath of the Sea. After getting all the treasure into a small mermaid statue, that'll bring it to the surface, Fireheart was brought back to her ship with her trusty pet fox Shadow waiting for her. It took a bit of time, but Fireheart finally got the treasure back to her ship. But she had to be quick on getting to the nearest outpost of it all, because another storm was brewing, and traveling out at sea in a storm was always dangerous. Luckily, she managed to get to Plunder Outpost, and she received a total of over 41,000 gold. Fireheart did feel proud of herself, but she was also excited for her next adventure with her crew because they'll be going to battle with a legend of the deep. As night creeps across the Sea of Thieves, Captain Fireheart gathered up some supplies for a daring and dangerous mission. Some of her crew members were busy, but 2 of them were available for this voyage, Indigo Seawater and another one of Fireheart's crew known as Professor Poseidon. We're looking forward to this voyage, even though it was going to be dangerous. Captain Fireheart and her crew weren't searching for gold or gems. Not this time. The 3 pirates were going hunting for one of the most dangerous apex predators of the Sea of Thieves, the Megalodon. All 3 pirates have heard many stories of ships getting ambushed by one of 5 types of megalodons across the generations of the Sea of Thieves, but have also heard stories of pirates taking down these giant sharks and receiving outstanding rewards from it. Captain Fireheart knew that this would be a tough voyage because sometimes the Megalodon is hard to find, and having either a sloop or a brigantine facing off an enemy like that meant that they wouldn't stand a chance. So Fireheart decided to get a galleon for the Megalodon battle. Even though a galleon gave the 3 pirates a better chance of succeeding, Fireheart actually preferred sloops and brigantines over galleons. As Fireheart, Professor, and Indigo departed from Galleon's grave outpost, they kept a close eye out for any Megalodons lurking around. Eventually, dawn rose over the horizon, and when the 3 pirates were about a mile from passing a small island called Skull Keep, the first Megalodon, called the Hungering One, appeared. As it leaped out of the water to try to take a bite of the ship, Indigo quickly lowered the anchor, and the battle soon began. Captain Fireheart, Indigo, Seawater, and Professor Poseidon took turns at some of the cannons, getting a few shots at the giant shark. The Megalodon kept on charging at the galleon, taking bites at it, and leaving holes in the ship. Fireheart started bailing the water out of the ship as Indigo repaired the ship, and Professor kept an eye on the Megalodon as it kept circling the 3 pirates. Eventually, the Megalodon finally went down, and the pirates emerged victorious. About a few seconds later, some treasure appeared in the water where the Megalodon had fallen, and with the treasure was another chest of rage. Fireheart remembered this very thing from the first time she took down the Skeleton Lord, Warden Chi, around 3 months ago. As Fireheart, Indigo, and Professor got all of the loot from the Megalodon onto their ship, they got the ship turned towards Sanctuary Outpost to sell the loot they received from the Megalodon, which all of it was worth over 7,000 gold. A small amount, but Fireheart and her crew were okay with, because on the Sea of Thieves, a small amount of gold was better than no gold at all. While Fireheart, Indigo, and Professor were having a break, the captain couldn't help but think that their days of hunting Megalodons were far from over.